Sometimes a man reaches a point where he has nothing left to lose and everything left to prove. Elias Crane was that kind of man, alone in the high country of Colorado, with his best years behind him and only questions ahead. He spent his last $200 on a foreclosed silver mine that folks said was cursed. The mine had been abandoned for 40 years, and the last men who went inside never came back out. But Elias lit his lantern and walked into that darkness anyway. What he found deep in those tunnels wasn't just old silver. It was a secret that powerful men thought they'd buried forever. And now they wanted it back. What was hidden in that mountain worth killing for? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Elias Crane had lived alone in the high country for so long that silence had become his only companion. His cabin sat at the end of a winding dirt road, 8 miles from the nearest town, tucked against a stand of ponderosa pine that whispered secrets when the wind came down from the peaks. He was 63 years old, though his hands looked older and his eyes looked ancient. The kind of eyes that had seen too much and said too little about it. Every morning followed the same pattern. He woke before dawn, made coffee in a dented pot on the wood stove, and sat on his porch watching the sun paint the mountains gold. The routine gave structure to days that otherwise had no particular purpose. He chopped wood, tended a small garden, hunted when he needed meat, and tried not to think too much about the life he'd walked away from. In his shirt pocket, he carried a tarnished pocket watch that had stopped working 27 years ago. The hands were frozen at 3:47. He never wound it, never tried to fix it, just carried it everywhere like a penance he couldn't name. It had belonged to his father, Jacob Crane, and it stopped ticking the exact moment a mine shaft collapsed and buried him under 2 tons of rock and earth. Elias had been there that day. He'd survived. His father hadn't. Some debts he'd learned couldn't be repaid, only carried. The town of Silver Point lay in the valley below, a place that had seen better days and knew it. Once it had been a prosperous silver mining town with 3,000 residents, bustling saloons, and a future bright enough to hurt your eyes. That was 50 years ago. Now maybe 400 souls remained, most of them too old or too stubborn to leave. The mines had played out decades back, and what little prosperity remained came from the few cattle, ranches in the surrounding hills, and the occasional tourist passing through on the way to somewhere more interesting. Elias drove down to Silver Point once a week for supplies. He kept to himself mostly, exchanged pleasantries with the grocer and the hardware store owner, and tried to avoid the pitying looks folks gave him. They all knew his story, or thought they did. The widower who'd lost his wife to divorce and his daughter to distance. The former prospector who'd never struck it rich. The man who lived alone because he'd forgotten how to live any other way. But Tom Hadley was different. Tom had been sheriff of Silver Point for 15 years, and before that he'd been Elias's friend. They'd grown up together, hunted these mountains as boys, shared dreams about the men they'd become. Life had taken them different directions, but Tom still stopped by the cabin every few weeks, bringing news from town and checking that Elias hadn't become a complete hermit. It was Tom who first told him about the mine. They'd been sitting on Elias's porch on a cool September evening, watching the light fade from the sky, when Tom mentioned it almost casually. County's foreclosing on the old Sentinel mine, auctions next Tuesday at the courthouse. Elias took a slow sip of coffee. Sentinel? That's been dead for 40 years. Closer to 50, Tom said. Last owner defaulted on taxes back in '76. Banks held the title since then, never found a buyer. Now they want it off the books. Nobody's fool enough to buy a played-out hole in the ground. Tom gave him a sideways look. Minimum bid's $200. Something shifted in Elias's chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Interest, maybe, or possibility. He kept his voice neutral. What's the catch? Same catch as always with Sentinel. People say it's cursed. The last crew that worked it, back in '38, they went in one morning and never came out. All 5 of them just vanished. Search parties found nothing, After that, folks decided the mountain wanted to be left alone. You believe that? Tom shrugged. I believe men tell stories to explain things they don't understand. Could have been a collapse, could have been bad air, could have been they found a way out and kept walking. But believing it's cursed is easier than admitting we don't know. Elias turned the dead pocket watch over in his fingers. $200. That's what I heard. Tom stood up, stretched his back. Thought you might want to know. Not many prospectors left around here with the experience to evaluate a property like that. He paused at the steps. Even if it is just a hole in the ground. After Tom left, Elias sat on his porch until full dark settled over the mountains. $200 was most of what he had left in the world. His pension, from the years he'd worked for the mining company, barely covered his property taxes and basic supplies. Spending it on a worthless mine claim would be the act of a desperate man or a foolish one. He pulled out the pocket watch, studied its frozen face in the moonlight. 3:47. The moment everything changed. The moment his father's dreams died and Elias's guilt was born. Maybe it was time for another moment like that. The auction was held in the county courthouse on a Tuesday morning. Elias arrived early and took a seat in the back row of folding chairs. A dozen other people showed up, mostly curiosity seekers and retired miners with nothing better to do. The auctioneer was a tired-looking woman from the county assessor's office who clearly wanted this over with. She read through the property description in a monotone voice. Lot 47, Sentinel Mine, deeded 1873, approximately 2 miles of tunnels on 3 levels, inactive since 1938. Sold as is, with no warranties or guarantees, mineral rights included. Minimum bid $200. Elias waited. Nobody raised a hand. $200, the auctioneer repeated. Do I have 200? A man in an expensive suit near the front raised his hand. Elias didn't recognize him, but he recognized the type. A lawyer or an agent, someone bidding for someone else. 200 to the gentleman in front, the auctioneer said with obvious relief. Do I have 225? Elias's hand went up before he could think about it. 225 to the gentleman in back. Do I have 250? The suit raised his hand immediately. 250. Do I have 275? This was insane. Elias was bidding his survival on a hole in the ground that had killed men and produced nothing in 87 years. But his hand went up anyway. 275. Do I have 300? The suit hesitated, then shook his head. He pulled out a phone, stepped into the hallway. The auctioneer waited, tapping her pen on the podium. After a minute, the suit came back, looking irritated, and sat down without raising his hand again. Going once at 275, the auctioneer said. Going twice. Sold to the gentleman in back for $275, just like that. Elias owned a cursed mine and had $43 left to his name. He filled out the paperwork in a daze, signed forms he barely read, and received a deed that looked like it had been printed sometime around the Civil War. The suit approached him in the hallway, offering $4,000 cash to transfer the deed immediately. Elias refused without really knowing why. The man's eyes went cold. You have no idea what you're getting into, old-timer. That mountain's got a history. So do I, Elias said, and walked out into the autumn sunlight. Tom found him at the diner an hour later, sliding into the booth across from him with a concerned expression. Heard you bought the Sentinel. News travels fast. In a town this size, everything travels fast. Elias, what are you thinking? You just spent your last $275. I know what I spent. Tom leaned back, studied him. That man who was bidding against you? He works for Marcus Thornwood. That name carried weight in Silver Point. Marcus Thornwood owned the largest cattle ranch in the county, had money going back 3 generations, and influence that reached into every corner of local politics. He was 40 years old, handsome in a hard way, and mean as a snake when crossed. Why would Thornwood want a dead mine? Elias asked. That's what worries me. Marcus doesn't do anything without a reason, and his reasons usually benefit Marcus. Tom drummed his fingers on the table. Just be careful. And if you're actually planning to go into that mine, take someone with you. Don't be alone down there. But But Elias had been alone for so long. He didn't know how to be any other way. He drove up to the Sentinel mine the next morning, following an overgrown track that hadn't seen vehicle traffic in decades. The entrance was just where the old maps said it would be, a timber-framed opening in the mountainside, half collapsed and choked with brush. A rusted sign hung crooked on the rock face, "Sentinel Mine, no trespassing." Elias stood at the entrance for a long time, feeling the cool air that breathed from the darkness inside. Somewhere in there, 5 men had vanished. Somewhere in there, silver veins still ran through the rock. Worthless now, but once worth dying for. Somewhere in there, maybe, was something worth finding. He touched the pocket watch in his shirt pocket. 3:47. The moment everything changed. Then he picked up his lantern, checked his rope and his pick, and stepped into the darkness of the mountain. The darkness inside the Sentinel mine was absolute. The kind that pressed against your eyes even when they were open. Elias's lantern pushed back a small circle of yellow light, revealing timber supports grey with age and walls that glistened with moisture. The air smelled of earth and stone and something else, something older, like the breath of time itself. He moved carefully, testing each step before committing his weight. The main tunnel sloped downward at a gentle angle, wide enough for ore carts that had long since turned to rust and ruin. His boots crunched on loose rock. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, a patient rhythm that had been counting out the decades while the world above forgot this place existed. The tunnel branched after 50 yards. Elias chose the left fork, following what his experience told him would be the main vein. The timbers here were in better shape, replaced during some later operation. He ran his hand along the wall, feeling the rough texture of pickaxe marks, reading the history written in stone. Men had worked this rock with hope in their hearts and sweat on their backs, dreaming of the fortune that would change their lives. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, perhaps 30 feet across. His lantern illuminated the remnants of a work area. Rusted tools lay scattered on the ground. A collapsed table, the skeleton of what had once been a wheelbarrow. And along the far wall, something that made him stop and raise the lantern higher, a camp. Not a mining camp, but something else entirely. The bedrolls had rotted to fragments, but their arrangement told a story. 4 of them, in a rough circle around a fire pit lined with stones. Cooking equipment hung from iron hooks driven into the wall, and stacked against the rock, covered with a tarp that had somehow survived the years, wooden crates. Elias approached slowly, alert for any sign of instability in the ceiling or walls. He pulled back the tarp, and dust exploded into the air, making him cough. The crates were stamped with markings he recognized from history books. CSA, Confederate States of America. His heart began to beat faster. He used his pick to pry open the nearest crate. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were rifles. Enfield rifles, standard Confederate issue, their metal protected by grease that had hardened over the decades. The next crate held ammunition. The third held what looked like officers' equipment. Uniforms, boots, a dress sword. This wasn't a mining camp. This was a hideout. Elias moved around the chamber more carefully now, seeing it with new eyes. The positioning made sense for defense. The entrance could be watched from cover. The fire pit was positioned so smoke would be drawn back into the tunnels, dispersing before it reached the surface. Whoever had set this up knew what they were doing. He found more evidence as he searched. Rotted leather saddlebags, tin plates and cups, a deck of playing cards so warped by moisture they'd fused into a solid brick, and tucked into a crevice in the wall, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed with wax, a book. Elias pulled it free carefully. The oilcloth cracked and fell away, but the book inside had been protected. Leather-bound, about the size of his hand, thick with pages. He opened it carefully to the first page. The handwriting was bold and clear, written in ink that had faded to brown but was still legible. This journal belongs to Captain Jonathan Black Jack Hendricks, 3rd Kentucky Cavalry, CSA. If found, return to my family in Lexington with word of how I died, for I do not expect to see home again. The year of our Lord, 1865. Elias sank down onto a relatively stable-looking rock, holding the journal close to the lantern light. He turned pages carefully, reading the story they told. Blackjack Hendricks and his men had been raiders, the kind of irregular cavalry that operated behind enemy lines, hitting supply trains and payrolls. As the war drew to its bitter close, they'd been tasked with one final mission: transport a cache of Confederate gold to sympathizers in California who would use it to fund continued resistance after the official surrender. They'd made it as far as Colorado before Union cavalry caught their trail. Hendricks and his 4 remaining men had hidden the gold and taken refuge in this abandoned silver mine, planning to wait out the pursuit and retrieve their cargo once it was safe. But something had gone wrong. The entries became more scattered after that, dated weeks apart instead of days. Supplies running low, one man sick with fever, arguing about whether to risk leaving. And then, the final entry, dated July 17th, 1865. The Union dogs have found us. We can hear them above, searching the mountain. The gold is secure in the vault we built in the lowest level. If we die here, it dies with us. I will not give those Yankees the satisfaction. We will make our stand and sell our lives dearly. Mother, if this ever reaches you, know that I died with honor. The cause may be lost, but our honor remains. The journal ended there. Elias sat in the darkness, pieces of a puzzle clicking together in his mind. The 5 men who vanished in 1938. They must have found this place, found the journal, gone looking for the gold. And something had happened to them too. He stood and moved around the chamber with renewed purpose, looking for anything else Hendricks might have left behind. The journal mentioned a vault in the lowest level. The Sentinel had 3 levels, according to the old maps. He'd need to find the way down. As he searched, his lantern beam caught something on the wall he'd missed before. Carved into the stone, covered by decades of dust and moisture, were symbols. Not random scratches, but deliberate marks arranged in patterns. He wiped the wall clean with his sleeve and stepped back to see them better. They looked like some kind of code. Arrows, numbers, letters arranged in sequences that made no immediate sense. He copied them carefully into his own small notebook, the one he always carried for recording mineral observations. Near the symbols, he found something else, a brass device about the size of his palm, circular, with 2 rotating discs marked with letters and numbers. It was tarnished but intact, and when he turned it, the discs moved smoothly. Some kind of cipher wheel, unless he missed his guess. A tool for encoding and decoding messages. This was how they'd hidden the directions to their vault. Confederate intelligence had used cipher wheels extensively during the war. If he could figure out how to use this one, those symbols on the wall might tell him exactly where the gold was hidden. Elias pocketed the device in the journal, his mind racing. This changed everything. The mine wasn't worthless. It held a secret that had been buried for 160 years. Confederate gold, hidden by dying men, lost to history. And if that man at the auction worked for Marcus Thornwood, if Thornwood had been trying to buy this mine, then maybe Thornwood knew something too. Maybe the curse, the vanished men, the warnings, maybe they were all meant to keep people away from what was really down here. He was about to head back to the surface when he heard it. A sound from deeper in the mine, from one of the tunnels leading away from this chamber. Not the drip of water or the settling of rock. Something else, something that sounded almost like footsteps. Elias froze, hand on his pick, lantern held high. The sound came again, faint but distinct. Someone or something was in the mine with him. He waited, barely breathing, listening with every fiber of his being. The sound didn't repeat. After 5 minutes of silence, he convinced himself it had been his imagination, or an echo of his own movements, or the mountains settling in ways that mimicked human sound. But as he made his way back to the surface, following his rope line through the darkness, he couldn't shake the feeling that the Sentinel mine was keeping more secrets than he'd discovered, and that some of those secrets might not want to be found. The afternoon sun was blinding after the darkness below. Elias stood at the mine entrance, blinking, letting his eyes adjust. The journal felt heavy in his pocket, weighted with history and possibility. He'd come looking for silver and found something far more valuable. But value, he knew, always came with a price. And he had a feeling he was about to learn just how expensive this discovery would be. Elias spent that evening at his cabin trying to appear normal, which was harder than he'd expected. He heated a can of beans for supper, sat on his porch as usual, watched the stars emerge over the mountains. But his hands kept drifting to his pocket, feeling the outline of the journal and the cipher wheel. And his mind kept returning to that chamber deep in the mountain, to the words written by a dying man 160 years ago. He waited until full dark before spreading the journal open on his kitchen table under the light of a kerosene lamp. He'd copied the wall symbols into his notebook, and now he studied them alongside the cipher wheel, trying to understand the relationship between the two. The wheel had two discs. The outer disc bore the letters A through Z. The inner disc had numbers 1 through 26, along with additional symbols. By rotating the inner disc to different positions, you could create different cipher alphabets. Simple in principle, devilishly effective in practice. Especially if you didn't know the key setting, Elias worked at it for hours, trying different combinations, comparing the coded symbols to the cipher wheel positions. His coffee went cold. His back ached from hunching over the table. But somewhere around midnight, a pattern began to emerge. The first symbol sequence, when decoded using the wheel set to position 7, spelled out third level North Passage. His pulse quickened. He worked faster now, decoding the rest. Past the collapse, follow the blue vein. Counting chamber marked with cross. It was a map, not a physical map, but verbal directions leading to wherever Hendricks and his men had hidden the gold. The vault they died protecting. Elias sat back, rubbing his eyes. The Sentinel Mine's third level. He'd never been down that far, hadn't even known if it was still accessible. The maps he'd seen showed extensive tunnel work down there, but that had been dug in the 1870s, 60 years before the mine's final closure. There was no telling what condition it might be in. He needed more information, and he needed it without drawing attention to what he'd found. The next morning, he drove into Silver Point earlier than usual. The town library was a small building tucked between the hardware store and what used to be a hotel, now converted into low-rent apartments. Martha Simmons had been the librarian for 30 years, a woman in her 70s with sharp eyes and a sharper memory. Elias Crane, she said as he walked in. Twice in 1 month. I might have to declare this a trend. Need to do some research, he said, trying to sound casual. Local history, mining records, that sort of thing. Wouldn't have anything to do with that mine you just bought, would it? Small town, he reminded himself. Everyone knew everything. Trying to understand what I own. Figure I should know the history. Martha led him to a back room where the local history collection was kept. Boxes of documents, old newspapers on microfilm, survey maps yellow with age. Most of the mining company records are in the state archives in Denver, she said. But we've got newspapers going back to the 1860s. Might find something useful there. Elias spent the morning reading through crumbling newspapers, his eyes straining at the old-fashioned typesetting. He found articles about the Sentinel's opening in 1873, reports of rich ore strikes in the 1880s, and then the gradual decline. By the 1920s, the articles were about cave-ins and accidents, about how the mine was playing out, about the company threatening to close. Then he found the articles about 1938. 5 men missing in Sentinel Mine, the headline read. Search continues. The article was brief. 5 miners had entered the Sentinel on the morning of October 3rd for routine work. When they hadn't emerged by nightfall, a search party went in. They found no trace of the men, no sign of what had happened. The article listed their names: Robert Garrett, James Mitchell, Thomas Whitmore, Samuel Chen, and Eduardo Vargas. A follow-up article 2 weeks later reported the search had been abandoned. The company declared the men dead and paid modest settlements to their families. The mine was permanently closed, and within a year the company itself went bankrupt. But there was something else. A smaller article buried on page 4 of a paper from November 1938, a human interest piece about one of the missing men. Robert Garrett had been a Civil War history enthusiast, the article said. He'd spent years researching Confederate raiding parties that had operated in Colorado during the war. His widow mentioned he'd been excited about something he'd found in his research, though she didn't know what. Elias sat very still, understanding clicking into place. Garrett had figured it out. He'd found the same clues Elias had found, decoded the same message. He'd taken 4 friends into the mine to find the Confederate gold, and they'd never come back out. Whatever had killed them was still down there. Finding what you need. Martha's voice made him jump. Just local color, he said, closing the newspaper. Interesting history. Her expression suggested she didn't quite believe him, but she didn't press. You be careful with that mine, Elias. I know you've got experience, but that place has a bad reputation for a reason. I'm always careful. After the library, he stopped at the general store for supplies. Coffee, canned goods, batteries. The owner, Frank Morrison, rang him up with a knowing smile. Hear you're going into the prospecting business again, just looking around. Probably nothing there. Marcus Thornwood stopped by yesterday asking about you. Wanted to know if you'd been buying any mining equipment. Elias's hands stilled on the counter. What did you tell him? Told him you bought a flashlight and some rope. Which was true at the time. Frank leaned in, lowering his voice. Watch yourself, Elias. Marcus has his fingers in everything around here, and he doesn't like losing. Whatever you're into, he'll want a piece of it. I'm not into anything. Sure, Frank said, clearly not believing that either. Just watch yourself. Elias loaded his supplies into his truck and was about to leave when he noticed a vehicle parked across the street. A black SUV with tinted windows, the kind that didn't belong in Silver Point. As he watched, a man got out of the driver's side. Tall, heavily built, wearing sunglasses despite the overcast day. The man stared at Elias for a long moment, then got back in the SUV and drove away. That evening, Tom Hadley showed up at the cabin unannounced. He accepted a cup of coffee and sat on the porch, not saying anything for a while, just looking out at the mountains. You want to tell me what you're really doing? He finally asked. Checking out my property. Elias, we've been friends for 40 years. I know when you're holding back. Tom sipped his coffee. Dutch Keller came into town today. You know Dutch? Can't say I do. He's Thornwood's foreman. Also his enforcer, his problem solver, and probably a few other things we don't want to think too hard about. He's got a reputation, and it's not for cattle ranching. Tom turned to look at him directly. He's been asking questions about you, about your schedule, about whether you've got family, about how often you go up to the mine. Elias felt something cold settle in his stomach. That sounds like a threat. That's because it is a threat. Marcus Thornwood wants something from you, and when Marcus wants something, he usually gets it. One way or another, the mine's mine. I bought it legal. Legal doesn't mean much when you're dealing with a man like Marcus. He's got lawyers, money, influence, and men like Dutch Keller who don't mind getting their hands dirty. Tom set down his coffee cup. Whatever you found in that mine, whatever you're looking for, is it worth dying for? The question hung in the air between them. Elias thought about the journal in his drawer, about the coded messages on the walls, about Confederate gold that had been lost for more than a century. He thought about his empty bank account and his purposeless life and the weight of regrets he carried every day. I found something, he admitted, something that might be valuable. And I think Thornwood knows about it, or at least suspects. Then sell him the mine. Name your price. It's not about the money. Then what's it about? Elias pulled the pocket watch from his shirt, looked at its frozen face. It's about finishing something, about going into the dark and coming back out with something to show for it. He looked at his old friend. My whole life I've left things unfinished. My father died because of me. That's not true. I was supposed to check the supports that morning. It was my job. I was young, careless, wanted to get to breakfast. I told him they looked fine without really checking. An hour later, the shaft collapsed. Elias's voice was steady, but the words cost him. My wife left because I was already buried, she said. Working underground, living in the past, never really present. Sarah grew up barely knowing me. I've spent 30 years moving from one failed prospect to another, chasing something I couldn't name. He pocketed the watch again. This mine, Tom, it's different. It's got a secret worth knowing, a mystery worth solving. And for the first time in longer than I can remember, I feel like I'm meant to be doing something. Like maybe this is what I'm supposed to finish before I'm done. Tom was quiet for a long time. Then he stood, squeezed Elias's shoulder. You're a stubborn old fool. Always have been. I know, but you're my stubborn old fool. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to be careful. You're going to tell me when you go into that mine. And if Marcus Thornwood or Dutch Keller or anyone else comes around causing trouble, you're going to call me immediately. Understood? Understood. After Tom left, Elias went back inside and pulled out the journal again. He read Hendrix's words by lamplight, feeling a strange kinship with the long-dead Confederate captain. Men separated by a century and a cause Elias had never believed in, but connected by the same human needs, purpose, meaning, the desire to matter. Hendrix had died in that mine protecting his mission, his honor, his last shred of meaning in a world that had fallen apart around him. Elias didn't plan on dying, but he understood the impulse, understood what it meant to stake everything on one final roll of the dice. Tomorrow he'd go back down into the Sentinel. He'd find the third level, follow the blue vein, locate the counting chamber marked with a cross. He'd discover what Hendrix had died protecting and what 5 men in 1938 had vanished trying to find. Whatever it cost, whatever dangers waited in the dark, he was going to see this through to the end. Elias returned to the Sentinel mine at first light, better equipped this time. He'd packed extra rope, a second lantern, chalk for marking his path, and a small crowbar. He told himself he was being cautious, but the weight of the crowbar in his pack felt more like preparation for trouble. The descent to the first level went smoothly. He passed through the chamber where he'd found Hendrix's camp, pausing only to check that everything was as he'd left it. The Confederate crates sat undisturbed in the darkness, silent witnesses to history. Finding the way to the third level took longer. The shaft that should have led downward was partially collapsed, blocked by fallen timber and loose rock. But Elias had spent decades reading the language of mines, understanding how they were laid out, how they breathed and settled and aged. He found an alternate route, a ventilation tunnel that connected to a parallel shaft. The air grew colder as he descended. His breath came out in visible puffs. The walls here showed different mineral content, less silver ore, more blue-gray copper veining that gave the stone a strange iridescent quality in his lantern light. The third level opened into a network of tunnels more complex than he'd expected. Multiple passages branched in different directions, some wide enough to walk upright, others requiring him to crouch or crawl. His chalk marks left a trail of white scratches on the dark stone, breadcrumbs to lead him back out. He followed the blue vein as the decoded message had instructed. The copper content increased as he went deeper, the walls almost glowing in places where moisture brought out the mineral colors. The tunnel narrowed, forcing him to move sideways in places, his shoulders scraping stone. Then he saw the collapse Hendrix had mentioned. A section of the tunnel ahead was choked with fallen rock, the ceiling sagging dangerously. But there was a gap at the top, near the roofline, where the debris hadn't completely blocked the passage. Elias climbed carefully, testing each handhold, squeezing through the narrow space with his lantern held ahead of him. On the far side, the tunnel opened up again, and there, carved into the stone wall at shoulder height, was a cross. Simple, unmistakable, exactly as the coded message had described, the counting chamber. Elias moved his lantern slowly across the walls, looking for any other marks or signs. The chamber was roughly circular, perhaps 15 feet across. The walls showed extensive pickaxe work, but in patterns that didn't match normal mining operations. Someone had been excavating something specific here. Then he saw it, a section of wall that looked slightly different from the rest. The stone was the same, but the fit was too perfect, too regular. Someone had cut blocks, built a false wall, disguised it to blend with the natural rock. This was the vault. Elias set down his lantern and ran his hands over the wall, feeling for any weakness or gap. The work was masterful. Whoever had built this had known their trade. But stonework, no matter how good, always had seams, always had points of weakness. He found one near the bottom, a place where his crowbar could get purchase. He worked the bar into the gap, applied pressure carefully. Too much force, and he'd bring the whole thing down on top of himself. Too little, and he'd never break through. The stone resisted, then gave slightly. Encouraged, Elias shifted his angle and tried again. This time something moved, a grinding sound of rock on rock. He could feel it shifting, the false wall beginning to separate from its moorings. One more try. He braced himself, put his weight behind the crowbar, and pushed with everything he had. The wall gave way suddenly, stones tumbling inward with a crash that echoed through the tunnels like thunder. Dust billowed out, making him cough and cover his face. When it cleared, he raised his lantern and looked into the space beyond. Gold, bars of it stacked neatly on rough wooden shelves that sagged under the weight. Confederate currency in bound bundles, worthless as money now, but priceless as historical artifacts. Weapons, rifles, pistols, a sword, all carefully preserved. And documents sealed in tin boxes, probably military orders or intelligence reports, but there was something else, something that didn't belong. In the center of the vault, sitting on a wooden crate like an offering on an altar, was a metal box. Modern, lockbox style, the kind you might find in any hardware store. The contrast with everything else in the vault was jarring, impossible to miss. Elias approached it slowly, his mind trying to make sense of what he was seeing. This vault had been sealed since 1865. Nothing should be in here that wasn't from that era. Unless someone had opened it since then, the lockbox wasn't even locked. The clasp flipped up easily under his fingers. Inside were papers, documents on 20th century paper, typed rather than handwritten. And on top of them, a handwritten note on official letterhead, County Sheriff's Office, Silver Point, Colorado. The note was dated September 15, 1955, and it was signed by Sheriff William, Hadley Tom's father. Elias's hands were shaking as he read. The words written more than 70 years ago. To whoever finds this, I discovered this vault by accident while investigating the disappearance of 5 miners in 1938. Those men did find this place. What killed them was not a curse, but carbon monoxide from a pocket of bad air in the tunnels. Their bodies are sealed in a side chamber I will mark on the map included here, along with their personal effects. They deserve a proper burial, but removing them would require exposing this vault, and I cannot allow that. The gold in this vault represents approximately $40,000 at current prices. I've taken 10 bars to address an emergency in our community. The mining company that employs most of our town is about to declare bankruptcy and abandon Silver Point. Without jobs, this town will die. I have used this gold to provide the company with an anonymous loan that will keep it operational for another decade. Enough time for the men here to transition to other work or relocate their families. I cannot in good conscience keep this money or report it to federal authorities. It was stolen in service of a failed rebellion and has no rightful owner after all these years. But neither can I allow it to fall into hands that would use it for selfish purposes. Therefore, I have resealed this vault with 1 bar removed as proof of what I claim. If this town ever faces another crisis of survival, if our people truly need help that cannot come from any other source, then this gold may be used for the common good. But it must never be used for personal enrichment. Any man who opens this vault seeking wealth for himself will find only the burden of a terrible choice. Judge wisely. Choose honor over greed. Some treasures are meant to serve higher purposes than making one man rich. William Hadley. Sheriff, Silver Point, Colorado. Elias read the note 3 times, each reading adding another layer of complexity to what he'd thought was a simple treasure hunt. Tom's father had known about this vault for 70 years and never told anyone, had used the gold to save the town during the Depression, had left it here as a kind of insurance policy for future generations. And Tom, did Tom know? His father had died in 1998, according to the dates on the memorial plaque in the town square. Had he told his son before he passed, or had he kept the secret to his grave? The documents under the note were bank records, loan agreements, financial statements showing how the mining company had recovered from near bankruptcy in 1955, all the proof of what Sheriff Hadley had done. Elias looked at the gold bars stacked on their shelves. At current prices, this was easily several $1 million. Enough to change his life completely. Enough to buy back everything he'd lost: comfort, security, respect. Maybe even enough to build bridges to his daughter. But William Hadley's words echoed in his mind. Any man who opens this vault seeking wealth for himself will find only the burden of a terrible choice. He understood now why Tom's father had left the note. The easy thing would be to take the gold, claim salvage rights, become wealthy. But the right thing, that was harder to see. Elias was still trying to process this when he heard the sound. Not imagination this time, not echoes or settling stone. Voices coming from somewhere above. And then, more distinctly, the scrape of boots on rock. Someone else was in the mine. He moved quickly, leaving the vault as he'd found it, gathering his tools and lantern. The voices were getting closer, echoing down through the tunnels in a way that made it hard to determine their exact location. But they were definitely descending, coming toward the third level. Elias extinguished his lantern and moved by feel into the deepest shadow of the counting chamber. His eyes adjusted slowly to the absolute darkness. He controlled his breathing, made himself as still as stone. A light appeared in the tunnel entrance. Then another. Flashlights, modern and powerful, cutting through the dark in ways his old lantern never could. 3 men entered the chamber. The first was Dutch Keller. Elias recognized him from Tom's description, big and dangerous looking. The other 2 were younger, ranch hand types, armed with pistols, visible at their belts. "This is it," Dutch said, his voice echoing in the stone space. "The counting chamber. Old man's been here already. Look at those fresh tool marks on the wall." "Think he found it?" one of the younger men asked. "Won't matter if he did. Mr. Thornwood's got the law tied up. Crane's trespassing, technically. We're just securing the property until ownership can be properly established." Dutch's smile was visible, even in the flashlight beam. "And if the old fool gets hurt while trespassing, well, mining accidents happen." They began examining the vault opening, not noticing Elias pressed into the shadows behind a rockfall. His crowbar was in his hand, but 3 armed men against 1 old prospector wasn't odds he liked. Better to wait to see what they'd do. "Boss said to seal this back up once we confirm what's inside," Dutch said. "He'll come for it himself once he's got legal title to the mine." "What about Crane?" "Sheriff's gonna pay him a visit tomorrow, pressure him to sell. If he doesn't take the hint, we'll make sure he understands his choices more clearly." Dutch checked his watch. "Come on, we've got what we need. Let's get out before someone notices we're here." They left the way they'd come, their lights fading back up the tunnels. Elias waited a full 10 minutes in the darkness before he dared to relight his lantern and move. His hands were shaking, but not from fear. From anger. Thornwood was going to steal the mine through legal manipulation, was going to use the law itself as a weapon. And if Elias resisted, men like Dutch Keller would handle him the old-fashioned way. He made his way back to the surface, moving fast now, not caring about stealth. The afternoon sun was setting by the time he emerged, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple, beautiful and indifferent to the struggles of men. At the mine entrance, Elias found fresh boot prints in the soft earth. And something else. A business card, left wedged in the timber frame where he couldn't miss it. Marcus Thornwood, Thornwood Ranch and Cattle Company. And a handwritten note on the back: "We should talk about your property. Tomorrow, my ranch, 10 a.m. Don't make me come looking for you." Elias pocketed the card, his jaw tight. The game had changed. This wasn't about a simple treasure hunt anymore. This was about power, control, and men who were willing to do whatever it took to get what they wanted. He needed help. Real help, not just good intentions. He needed people he could trust with the truth. As he drove back toward town, his mind was already working through the possibilities. through the few allies he had left in a world that seemed determined to take everything from him one more time. Elias drove straight to the telegraph office in town, one of the few businesses still operating on Main Street. The young woman behind the counter looked up from her phone, surprised to see anyone. Most people used email these days, but Elias had never gotten comfortable with computers, and besides, a telegram felt more serious somehow, more permanent. "Need to send a message to Denver," he said, pulling out one of his last remaining bills. She pushed a form across the counter. "Address?" He hesitated, pen hovering over the paper. He'd memorized the address years ago but had never used it, never allowed himself to reach out. Pride, guilt, fear of rejection, all the usual reasons men let relationships die, but this was different. This was important. He wrote carefully. "Sarah Crane, 1847, Lafayette Street, Denver, Colorado." The message took him longer. How do you summarize 10 years of silence in a few lines? How do you ask for help when you've spent a lifetime refusing it? Finally, he wrote, "Sarah, I know it's been too long. I'm in trouble and I need your help. Not money, just your time and maybe your forgiveness. Please come to Silver Point if you can. Dad." He paid, watched the young woman type the message into her computer system, and walked back out into the cooling evening. Whether Sarah would respond, whether she'd even read the telegram, was beyond his control now. All he could do was wait and hope, but he couldn't wait for everything. He had 24 hours before Thornwood expected him at the ranch. 24 hours to figure out his next move. He found Tom Hadley at the sheriff's office doing paperwork by the light of a desk lamp. Tom looked up, took one look at Elias's face, and closed the file he'd been working on. What happened? Elias told him everything. The vault, the gold, the note from William Hadley, Dutch Keller and his men in the mine, the threatening card from Thornwood. He left nothing out. When he finished, Tom sat back in his chair, looking older than he had that morning. "My father," Tom said quietly. "He never told me. All those years, and he never said a word. He was protecting you, protecting the secret. Or maybe he didn't trust me." Tom rubbed his face. "Doesn't matter now. What matters is Marcus Thornwood has you in a corner. If you don't sell, he'll manufacture legal problems until you're forced to. And if that doesn't work, Dutch Keller will make those problems physical. Can you stop him? Legally. Maybe for a while. But Marcus owns half the county council and has the judge in his pocket. He'll find a way." Tom stood, paced to the window. "My father's note said the gold was for the town's survival. Not for one man's profit. That's how I see it too. Then we need to think bigger than just protecting your claim. We need to think about what's right for Silver Point." Tom turned back to face him. "But first you need backup. Real backup, people who know what they're doing. I sent a telegram to Sarah." Tom's eyebrows rose. "Your daughter? When's the last time you two spoke?" 10 years. Maybe more. And you think she'll come?" "I don't know. But I had to try." Tom studied him for a long moment. "You're changing, old friend. Finally starting to reach out instead of pulling away. About damn time." He pulled a piece of paper from his desk drawer. "I've got 2 names for you. Miguel Santos. You remember Miguel? The prospector from Leadville? Thought he retired years ago. He did. Lives about 50 miles north now. Small cabin near Copper Creek. He's 72, stubborn as hell, and knows more about mining than anyone alive. If you're going back into that mountain, you want Miguel with you." "And the other name?" "Walter Price. He's my deputy, 26 years old, green but honest. More importantly, he's not on Thornwood's payroll, which makes him rare around here." Tom wrote down addresses. "Talk to Miguel first. If he agrees to help, then bring in Walter. We'll need someone official on our side if this gets ugly." Elias took the paper. "What about you?" "I'll do what I can from here. Slow down any legal moves Thornwood makes. Keep an eye on Dutch Keller. Make sure nobody does anything stupid." Tom's expression hardened. "But Elias, if it comes down to a choice between the law and what's right, I can't promise I'll always choose right. I took an oath. I understand. I hope you do. Because this is going to get worse before it gets better." Elias left the office as night settled fully over Silver Point. Instead of going home, he drove north, following the winding mountain roads toward Copper Creek. The drive took 2 hours, mostly in darkness, the truck's headlights cutting through the night like his lantern had cut through the mine. Miguel Santos's cabin was set back from the road, tucked into a grove of aspen trees. Smoke rose from the chimney, and warm light glowed in the windows. Elias knocked, half expecting to be turned away. It had been 15 years since they'd worked together, and they hadn't parted on the best terms. The door opened. Miguel stood there, smaller than Elias remembered, his hair pure white now, but his eyes still sharp and knowing. He looked at Elias for a long moment, then stepped aside without a word. The cabin was neat, sparse, comfortable. The walls were covered with geological maps and old mining photographs. Miguel poured 2 glasses of whiskey without asking, handed one to Elias, and sat down. "You look like hell, Crane." "Feel like it too." Tom called. "Said you might be coming by. Said I should hear you out before I threw you off my property." Miguel sipped his whiskey. "So talk." Elias talked. He told the story again, watching Miguel's face for reactions. The old prospector listened without interrupting, his expression giving away nothing. When Elias finished, Miguel stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkness. "You're asking me to go into a mine that's killed 5 men, face down a rich man with hired guns, and possibly die protecting gold that isn't ours to keep." Miguel turned around. "That about sum it up?" "Pretty much. And what do I get out of this, besides a likely burial in a collapsed tunnel? The satisfaction of doing something that matters. The chance to solve a 160-year-old mystery. And maybe the opportunity to save a town that's dying by inches." Miguel laughed, a dry sound. "You always did know how to sell a bad idea. Make it sound noble when it's really just dangerous and probably stupid." He finished his whiskey. "When do we start?" "Tomorrow morning. I'm supposed to meet Thornwood at his ranch at 10. I'd like to have seen the vault one more time before then, know exactly what we're dealing with. You got proper equipment? Maps? Safety gear?" "Some could use better. My truck's loaded with everything we need. I keep it ready, just in case someone offers me a bad idea worth taking." Miguel's smile was genuine now. "Been a long time since I felt useful, Crane. Been a long time since anything mattered enough to risk my neck over. Your timing's either perfect or terrible, and I can't tell which." They drove back to Silver Point together, Miguel following in his truck. At Elias's cabin, they went through equipment, consolidated supplies, planned their descent. Miguel studied the decoded messages from Hendrix's journal, nodded with professional appreciation. Good work on the cipher. Most men wouldn't have figured it out. He traced the route on a map. "3rd level's dangerous. Hope you know that. The deeper you go, the more ways things can kill you." "I know. Good. Fear keeps you careful. Overconfidence gets you dead." They were still planning when headlights swept across the cabin windows. A car pulled up, and Elias's heart jumped when he saw who got out. Sarah, she was 35 now, not the young woman he remembered. She'd cut her hair short, wore professional clothes that marked her as someone with a real career, a real life. But her eyes were the same, her father's eyes, and they held the same mixture of wariness and determination. She stood at the bottom of the porch steps, looking up at him. For a moment, neither spoke. 10 years of silence pressed between them like a physical weight. "You said you needed help," she finally said. "I did." "I do." Elias came down the steps, stopped a respectful distance away. "Thank you for coming." "I almost didn't." She looked past him at Miguel, who'd appeared in the doorway. "I told myself you'd burned that bridge too many times, that I didn't owe you anything." She met his eyes again. "But Mom made me promise before she died. She said if you ever reached out, I should answer. She said everyone deserves a chance at redemption, even stubborn old fools who don't ask for it." The mention of his ex-wife hit harder than Elias expected. "When did she? 2 years ago, cancer." Sarah's voice was steady but carried old pain. "I sent a letter to your last known address. It came back undeliverable. I'm sorry. I should have stayed in touch. I should have." There were too many things he should have done, and none of the words felt adequate. "You should have been there," Sarah said simply. "But you weren't, and we can't change that." So if you brought me here to apologize, fine, apology noted. But if there's actually something I can help with, something real, then let's focus on that. Miguel stepped forward, offering his hand. Miguel Santos, ma'am. I've known your father for 30 years, and I can tell you with complete honesty that he's a stubborn old fool. But he's not a bad man, and what he's trying to do here matters. Sarah shook his hand, then looked at Elias. So tell me what this is really about. And don't leave anything out. They went inside. Elias laid out the whole story for the third time that night, but this time he included details he'd left out before. He told her about the pocket watch, about his father's death, about the guilt he'd carried for 27 years. He told her about the years of failed prospects and broken promises, about how he'd let mining consume him until there was nothing left for family, and he told her about the Sentinel, about Hendrix's journal, about the vault, and the choice that William Hadley had made 70 years ago. When he finished, Sarah sat quietly, processing. She'd inherited her mother's analytical mind, her ability to see patterns and connections. Finally, she spoke. This isn't just about gold. It's about legacy, about what we leave behind and whether it matters. She looked at her father. And for you, it's about proving you can finish something, that you're not just a man who runs away when things get hard. The words stung because they were true. Maybe it is. Does that make it wrong? No, it makes it human. Sarah pulled out a laptop from her bag. I'm a teacher, but I minored in history. Let me see that journal. Over the next 3 hours, Sarah worked with a focus that reminded Elias painfully of her mother. She photographed every page of Hendrix's journal, cross-referenced names and dates with online historical databases, built a timeline of events. Blackjack Hendrix wasn't just a raider, she said finally. He was Confederate intelligence. West Point graduate, decorated cavalry officer. After the war, he was supposed to be executed for espionage, but he escaped and disappeared. The Union thought he died trying to cross into Mexico. She showed them a newspaper article from 1866, but he made it as far as Colorado, with enough gold to fund a continued insurgency. The war was over, Miguel said, not for everyone. There were Confederate sympathizers who believed they could continue the fight, maybe even start a new nation in the Western Territories. Sarah pulled up more documents. That's what the gold was for. Not personal enrichment, funding a revolution that never happened. Because Hendrix died in that mine, Elias said, along with his men and his dream. And the gold sat there for 80 years, until your friend's father found it and used it to save this town. Sarah closed her laptop. So the question is, what do we do with it now? Keep it out of Thornwood's hands, Miguel said immediately. A man like that would use it for himself and damn the town. Agreed, Sarah said. But keeping it from him and deciding its proper use are two different problems. Elias pulled out the drawing then. He'd found it earlier while looking for the journal, stuck in a box of old papers he'd been carrying around for years. A child's drawing, done in crayon, showing a little girl and a tall man holding hands. The caption read, "My hero daddy," in shaky letters. He handed it to Sarah. She looked at it, and her expression cracked for the first time that night. "I was 6, she whispered. "You drew it the day I took you to see your first mine. You weren't scared at all. You held my hand and asked questions about rocks and where they came from." Elias's voice was rough. "I kept it all these years. Carried it with me to every job, every failed prospect. Couldn't bear to throw it away, couldn't bear to look at it. Because it reminded me of who I used to be to you before I let you down." Sarah set the drawing down carefully, wiped her eyes. "You can't fix the past with one grand gesture, Dad. I know. But maybe I can at least show you I'm trying. Maybe we can do something good together, something that matters. And maybe that's a start." She looked at him for a long moment, and he saw the war happening behind her eyes. Old hurt battling against the desire to believe, anger fighting with hope. Finally she nodded. "One chance. That's what you get. Don't waste it." "I won't." Miguel cleared his throat. "Hate to interrupt the family reunion, but we've got practical problems. Thornwood expects Elias at his ranch in 8 hours. We need a plan." "I'll go," Elias said. Hear what he has to say. Buy us time. Not alone, Sarah said immediately. If he's dangerous, he won't try anything at his own ranch. Too obvious. No, this is about intimidation, about making me see that resistance is futile. Elias looked at his daughter. But while I'm there, you and Miguel could go to the mine. Document everything in that vault. Photographs, inventory, the whole thing. Sarah's research skills and Miguel's mining knowledge. You'd make a good team, and if Thornwood's men show up... Miguel asked, then you leave. The mine's not worth dying for. The truth we document is, they talked through the plan, refined it, prepared for contingencies. By the time they finished, dawn was breaking over the mountains. Sarah had claimed the spare bedroom. Miguel stretched out on the couch. Elias sat on his porch with coffee, watching the sun rise like he'd done 1,000 times before. But this morning felt different. This morning he wasn't alone. They returned to the Sentinel mine at first light, all 4 of them this time. Tom had officially taken personal leave, claiming family emergency. Walter Price, the young deputy, came along at Tom's insistence. Someone needed to maintain chain of custody for any evidence they recovered. Walter was nervous, but determined. A tall kid with honest eyes and the kind of integrity that was increasingly rare. He'd grown up hearing stories about the Sentinel's curse, and walking into those dark tunnels was clearly testing every ounce of his courage. Stay close, Miguel told him. Watch where you step, listen to instructions, and don't touch anything unless I say so. They descended with proper equipment this time. Helmets, lights, rope systems, first aid kits. Miguel led the way with the assurance of a man who'd spent 50 years underground. Sarah followed, carrying the camera equipment and documentation supplies. Elias came next, with Walter and Tom bringing up the rear. The mine felt different with 5 people in it. Less lonely, but also more dangerous. Every sound echoed differently. Every shadow held new possibilities for disaster. They made their way to the 3rd level, following the route Elias now knew by heart. At the counting chamber, they paused. The false wall had been partially dismantled by Elias's earlier work, making the vault visible. Sarah and Walter began photographing and documenting everything, while Miguel and Elias studied William Hadley's maps. Looking for the side chamber where the bodies were hidden. Should be about 50 yards east, Miguel said, tracing the route with his finger. Through here, then down a narrow passage that branches off the main tunnel. Hadley says he sealed it with loose rock, made it look like a natural collapse. They found it exactly where the map indicated. A section of wall that appeared to be fallen debris, but was actually carefully stacked stone. Working together, they began removing rocks, piling them aside. The work was slow, careful. Any mistake could trigger a real collapse. Behind the false wall, the passage opened into a small chamber. And there, after 70 years of darkness, were the 5 missing miners. Walter turned away, his face green. Even Tom, with years of law enforcement experience, looked shaken. The men were just skeletons now, scattered where they'd fallen, still wearing the remnants of their mining clothes. But the bullet holes in their skulls told a story that needed no words. Execution style, Tom said quietly. Hadley was right. This was murder, plain and simple. Sarah worked with professional detachment, photographing every angle, documenting the scene with the thoroughness of someone who understood its historical importance. This will stand up in court. No question about cause of death. Elias found personal effects scattered among the remains. Pocket watches, wedding rings, identification papers, miraculously preserved in the dry air. Each item was a life cut short, a family destroyed by one man's greed. Among the effects, he found a leather notebook that had belonged to Robert Garrett, the Civil War enthusiast who'd led his friends into this trap. The pages were brittle but readable. Garrett had decoded Hendrix's journal just like Elias had, found the same clues, dreamed the same dreams of discovery. The final entry, written in shaky handwriting, was dated October 3rd, 1938. We found the chamber. The gold is real. We're going back for help, to report this to the authorities properly. But something's wrong. We hear voices at the entrance. Someone followed us. If something happens, if we don't make it out, someone needs to know the truth about Jonathan Thornwood. The entry ended there, mid-sentence. The story finished in bullet holes and bones. We need to get this evidence back to the surface, Tom said. Every personal effect, every photograph. We'll document this properly, build a case that can't be dismissed or covered up. They worked for another hour, carefully cataloguing and collecting. Walter had overcome his initial shock and now moved with grim determination. This was why he'd become a deputy, to find justice for those who couldn't speak for themselves. They were preparing to leave when Sarah's light caught something else. A glint of metal in the far corner of the chamber, half buried under loose rock. "There's something here," she said, kneeling to examine it closer. Miguel helped her clear away the debris. What they uncovered made everyone stop and stare. Another lockbox. Not old like the Confederate equipment, not even as aged as William Hadley's 1955 box. This one was modern, maybe 10 or 15 years old, with a combination lock that had been broken open. "That's not possible," Elias said. "Nobody's been down here since someone was," Tom finished grimly. He opened the box carefully. Inside were documents, recent documents printed on modern paper. Bank statements, property deeds, photographs, and a letter dated 2010, addressed to whom it may concern, written in the same hand that had signed William Hadley's note from 1955. Tom's hands shook as he read. "It's from my father, written 5 years before he died," he read aloud, his voice rough with emotion. "I am Sheriff William Hadley, and this is my confession. For 55 years, I have kept a terrible secret. In 1955, I discovered Confederate gold in the Sentinel mine, and evidence that Jonathan Thornwood had murdered 5 miners. I used some of that gold to save our town, and I told myself it was justice, that the good I did with stolen money somehow balanced the scales. But I was wrong. The gold wasn't mine to take, and justice delayed is justice denied. I should have exposed Thornwood no matter the cost. Instead, I protected my community at the expense of truth, and I've carried that burden every day since. Worse, I realize now that Marcus Thornwood suspects what his great-grandfather did. I've seen him searching old records, asking questions about the Sentinel, following the same trails I did 60 years ago. He's not looking to make amends. He's looking to cover up the crimes and claim what he thinks is his family's property. I fear what will happen when I'm gone, when there's no one left who knows the full truth. So I'm leaving this documentation as insurance. Everything is here, bank records showing where the gold went, evidence of the murders, my own complicity in hiding the truth. I used 10 bars of gold to save Silver Point in 1955. That was wrong, but it's done. The remaining gold must never fall into Marcus Thornwood's hands. It should go to the state, to be used for the public good, not to enrich one family built on blood and lies. If you're reading this, you've found the truth I was too cowardly to speak while alive. Don't make my mistakes. Don't choose easy silence over hard truth. The men who died here deserve justice, even if it comes 90 years too late. William Hadley, June 15th, 2010. The chamber was silent, except for the sound of water dripping somewhere in the darkness. Tom set down the letter, his expression a mixture of grief and anger. He knew, Tom said. My father knew Marcus was searching, knew the danger, and he never told me. He left me this letter and hoped I'd find it in time. He trusted you, Sarah said gently. He knew you'd do the right thing when the time came, but the time came years ago, and I didn't know. How many chances did Marcus have to find this first? How close did we come to losing everything? Elias looked at the lockbox, at the letter, at the evidence spread around them. A new understanding was dawning, pieces clicking into place with terrible clarity. The vault, he said slowly. We need to check the vault again. Right now. They moved quickly back to the counting chamber. This time, Elias entered the vault with a different perspective, looking not just at what was there, but at what might be missing. It took him 10 minutes to confirm what he'd begun to suspect. The gold's been moved, he said. Look at the shelves. See how they're warped? That's from weight that's no longer there. The bars that are here now, count them. 32. William Hadley's note said he took 10. That should leave 30. But look at the shelf marks. There were at least 50 bars originally. Miguel examined the shelves with his prospector's eye. He's right. Dust patterns don't lie. There's been significant weight removed, and recently, within the last few years, I'd say. Marcus, Tom said. He found a way in. Found the vault, and he's been stealing from it gradually, taking what he thought was his family's property. Sarah was checking the documents in William Hadley's lockbox more carefully. There's an inventory here. Your father documented every bar, every weapon, every document. He photographed everything. She compared the photos to what remained. 20 bars are missing. At current gold prices, that's over $1 million. That's why Marcus has been so desperate to buy the mine legally, Elias said. He's already stolen half the gold, but he can't take the rest without official ownership. Every time he comes down here, he risks being discovered. If he owns the property, he can clean out the vault at his leisure, and no one could question it. And when you bought the mine out from under him, Tom added, you became the one obstacle between him and finishing what his great-grandfather started. Walter spoke up, his young voice uncertain. But if he's already taken half the gold, isn't that theft? Can't we arrest him for that? With what proof? Tom said. We can show gold is missing, but we can't prove Marcus took it. He'd claim it was gone before he ever entered the mine, if he admits to entering at all. And his lawyers would tie this up in court for years, unless we catch him in the act, Sarah said. She looked at her father. He knows you're onto something. That's why he made the offer, why he threatened legal action. He's running out of time. Elias understood what she was suggesting. We let him think he's won. Tell him I'm accepting his offer, arranging the sale. While his guard is down, we watch the mine. When he comes for the rest of the gold, we document it. That's a sting operation, Tom said. It's risky. If Marcus suspects a trap, he'll send Dutch Keller and his men. Could get violent. Then we be ready for violence, Miguel said calmly. I've been in tight spots before. Rather face a fight I can see coming than get shot in the back by lawyers and legal maneuvers. They spent the next hour planning. Sarah would contact Marcus, relay that Elias was ready to discuss terms. Tom would quietly position himself and Walter to observe the mine from a distance. Miguel and Elias would hide in the tunnels, waiting with cameras and recording equipment. As they prepared to leave the mine, Elias paused at the chamber where the 5 miners lay. He stood for a moment in silence, thinking about Robert Garrett and his 4 friends. Men who dreamed of discovery and found only death. We'll tell your story, he said quietly. You'll have proper burial, and people will know what happened. That's a promise. Back at the surface, they divided tasks. Sarah drove to a neutral location in town, the diner where she could be seen, and called Marcus Thornwood from her cell phone. Elias listened on speaker as she delivered the message. Mr. Thornwood, this is Sarah Crane, Elias Crane's daughter. My father asked me to call you. He's been thinking about your offer, and he wants to discuss terms. Would tomorrow afternoon work? Say 2 o'clock at the mine site? There was a pause. Then Marcus's voice, carefully controlled. The mine site. Why not my ranch or a lawyer's office? My father's an old prospector. He wants to show you exactly what you're buying. Make sure you understand the property's condition. Professional courtesy, he called it. Sarah's voice was perfectly innocent, hiding the trap beneath pleasant words. Another pause. Tomorrow at 2. I'll be there. After the call ended, Tom shook his head admiringly. You're a natural at this. Ever consider law enforcement? I teach 8th graders. That's law enforcement enough. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Miguel and Elias gathered equipment, cameras with night vision, audio recorders, camping supplies for what might be a long wait. Tom arranged for Walter to call in sick, giving them an extra pair of hands without raising suspicion. That evening, as the sun set over the mountains, the 5 of them gathered at Elias's cabin for what might be their last quiet meal together. Sarah had cooked, nothing fancy, just stew and bread, but it felt like a family dinner in a way that Elias hadn't experienced in decades. After this is over, Sarah said, we need to talk about what comes next. For both of us. Elias met her eyes. I'd like that. I mean, really talk. About Mom, about the years we lost, about whether we can build something better going forward. I know I can't fix the past. No, you can't. But maybe we can build a different future. If we're both willing to try. She reached across the table, took his hand. I'm willing, Dad, but you have to be too. No more running away into mines and mountains when things get hard. I promise, Elias said, and meant it with everything he had. That night, Elias and Miguel positioned themselves in the Sentinel mine. They'd chosen a spot in the second level, near enough to the vault to see and hear, but far enough back to avoid detection. They settled in with the patience of men who'd spent lifetimes waiting in darkness. You know, this could go wrong in about 100 different ways. Miguel said quietly, I know. Good, wanted to make sure you weren't being stupidly optimistic. Miguel checked his watch. What time did Sarah say she'd make the call? Midnight. Tell Marcus that Elias was having second thoughts. Needed to meet earlier, say 6 in the morning instead of 2 in the afternoon. You think he'll come tonight? I think he won't be able to resist. He'll tell himself he's just checking the vault before the official meeting, making sure everything's still there. But really, he'll be planning to take what's left and claim it was already gone when he bought the property. They waited in silence, the darkness pressing close around them. Elias thought about his father, about William Hadley, about all the men who died in these tunnels chasing dreams of silver and gold. He thought about the choices that had brought him here, some good, many bad, all leading to this moment. At 12:47 a.m., almost exactly the time his father had died all those years ago, though on a different day, they heard it. The sound of someone entering the mine, not careful prospector sounds, not the cautious movements of someone respecting the danger. These were the sounds of entitlement, of someone who thought they owned the darkness. Lights appeared in the main tunnel. Not 1, but 3. Marcus Thornwood wasn't alone. Dutch Keller with him, Miguel whispered, recognizing the big foreman's silhouette. And 2 others, all armed. The men moved with purpose toward the third level. They knew exactly where they were going. Elias and Miguel followed at a distance, cameras recording in night vision mode. They watched as Marcus led his men to the counting chamber, to the vault that his great-grandfather had died trying to find. 20 bars left, Marcus said, his voice echoing in the chamber. We take them all tonight. By tomorrow this mine is legally mine, and no one can question what I found or didn't find here. What about the old man? Dutch asked. What about him? Once the gold's gone, he owns a worthless hole in the ground. Let him have it, Marcus laughed, a sound without warmth. My great-grandfather spent his life searching for this. My grandfather died bitter that he couldn't finish the search. My father wasted years trying to legally acquire this property. But I found it. I figured it out. This is Thornwood gold, and I'm taking what belongs to my family. What about the bodies? One of the other men asked. The 5 miners? What about them? They've been dead for 90 years. Another decade or century won't matter to them. Marcus began loading gold bars into heavy-duty bags. Besides, they got what they deserved. They were thieves, just like anyone else who'd try to claim what's ours. The casual dismissal of murder, the complete lack of remorse, told Elias everything he needed to know about Marcus Thornwood. This wasn't just about money. It was about entitlement so deep it had calcified into something monstrous. Miguel's camera captured everything. The theft, the admissions, the complete disregard for law or decency. They were about to retreat, to get the evidence to safety. When disaster struck, a loose rock dislodged by their movement clattered down into the chamber below. Everything stopped. 4 flashlights swung toward the sound. We're not alone, Dutch said, his hand going to his pistol. Find them, Marcus ordered. No witnesses, no evidence. And just like that, documentation became survival. Elias and Miguel moved fast, years of mining experience guiding them through darkness that would have paralyzed most men. They turned off their lights the instant the rock fell, relying on memory and touch to navigate back toward the second level. Behind them, flashlight beams cut through the tunnels like search spotlights, accompanied by the sound of heavy boots and shouted commands. Dutch Keller's voice echoed, "They can't have gone far. These tunnels only have so many exits." "Split up," Marcus ordered. "Dutch, take Jensen and check the main shaft. Keller, you're with me. We'll search the side passages." Elias touched Miguel's arm, guiding them left into a narrow ventilation tunnel. It was a tight squeeze, barely wide enough for one man to move through sideways, but it connected to multiple sections of the mine. If they could reach it before being spotted, they'd have options. They made it 10 feet before a flashlight beam caught them. There! One of the men, Jensen, brought up his pistol. Run! Miguel shoved Elias forward into the ventilation shaft. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space, the bullet ricocheting off stone with a whine that seemed to last forever. Elias felt rock chips sting his face, but kept moving, Miguel right behind him. You hit? Elias gasped. No, keep going. The ventilation shaft angled upward, forcing them to climb. Elias's 63-year-old body protested every movement, muscles burning, lungs screaming for air. But fear and adrenaline pushed him forward. They emerged into a larger chamber, one of the old work areas from the mine's active days. Elias pulled out a small LED flashlight, risked a quick sweep. The chamber had 3 exits, multiple places to hide, and several wooden support beams that looked dangerously unstable. We can defend here if we have to, Miguel said, breathing hard. Or try to make it to the surface. They're between us and the main entrance. We'd have to go through them. The Silver Bell exit? Too far. We'd never make it before they caught us. Elias thought fast, drawing on decades of experience reading mines. But there's another way. The air shaft. Every deep mine had ventilation shafts to prevent gas buildup and provide emergency exits. The Sentinel's shaft opened onto the mountainside about 200 yards from the main entrance. It was narrow, steep, and hadn't been maintained in 50 years, but it existed. That's a 70-foot vertical climb, Miguel said. In the dark, with men hunting us. You got a better idea? Miguel checked his camera, made sure it was still recording. At least we got what we came for. This footage shows everything, the theft, the admission about the bodies, Marcus's complete disregard for the law. Doesn't matter if we don't survive to share it. True enough. Miguel pulled something from his pack, a flare gun. Brought this for emergencies. Signal Tom if we got in trouble. One red flare means call the cavalry. We're not there yet. Getting close, though. They moved through the chamber toward the passage that would lead to the ventilation shaft. Behind them, voices grew closer. Marcus and his men were searching methodically, checking every tunnel, every side chamber. Elias and Miguel had almost reached the ventilation shaft entrance when Dutch Keller stepped out of the shadows ahead of them. Pistol raised. End of the line, old-timers, they froze. Dutch's flashlight illuminated them clearly, and his gun never wavered. He was professional, practiced, dangerous in ways that made Elias's skin crawl. We got it all on camera, Elias said, trying to keep his voice steady. Everything Marcus said, everything you've done. You let us go, maybe we can work something out. See, that's where you're wrong. Dutch smiled without warmth. You're trespassing in a dangerous mine. Tragic accident waiting to happen. We tried to warn you, but old men get stubborn. Get lost in the dark. Maybe trigger a collapse. Very sad. Mr. Thornwood will be real broken up about it. Tom Hadley knows we're here. Tom Hadley's at home sleeping. And even if he wasn't, by the time he could organize a search party, this mine will have claimed 2 more victims to go with the other 5. Dutch gestured with the gun. Now hand over that camera real slow, and maybe I'll make this quick, instead of leaving you to suffocate in the dark. Miguel's hand moved toward his pack. Dutch's gun shifted immediately. Don't even think about it. Just getting the camera, Miguel said calmly. You wanted it, right? Slow, very slow. Miguel moved with exaggerated care, reaching into his pack. But instead of the camera, he pulled out the flare gun and fired in one smooth motion. The flare exploded from the barrel with a whoosh of ignition, streaking directly at Dutch. The big man dove sideways, firing reflexively. Miguel grunted as the bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. Miguel! Elias grabbed his friend as he stumbled. Get the shaft, Miguel gasped. I'm right behind you. But he wasn't. His shoulder was bleeding badly, his face pale even in the dim light. Dutch was already recovering, bringing his gun up again. Elias made a split-second decision, born of decades of guilt and debt. He'd watched his father die in a mine, watched helplessly as rock and timber buried the man who'd raised him. He wasn't going to watch another friend die in the darkness while he ran away. He charged Dutch Keller. It was stupid, suicidal, the act of a man who'd spent too long choosing safety over courage. But it was also the right thing, and for once in his life, Elias chose right over easy. Dutch's gun came around, but not fast enough. Elias hit him low and hard, using momentum and surprise to drive the bigger man backward. They crashed into a support beam. The ancient wood groaned. "You old fool," Dutch snarled, bringing the gun up point blank. Elias grabbed his wrist, forcing the weapon away. They struggled, two men grappling in near darkness, both fighting for their lives. Dutch was younger, stronger, trained in violence. But Elias had rage, decades of it, compressed into this single moment. Rage at himself for all his failures. Rage at men like Dutch who hurt people for money. Rage at the universe that had taken so much from him. The gun went off. Elias felt the heat of the muzzle flash, the deafening crack of sound. But the bullet went wide, buried itself in stone. Miguel appeared, swinging a length of timber like a club. He caught Dutch across the back of the head with a sickening thud. The big man went down, not unconscious but dazed, the gun falling from his fingers. "Go!" Miguel shoved Elias toward the ventilation shaft. "I'll slow them down. Not without you." "Damn it, Crane, don't be—" The rest of the sentence was lost in a roar of sound. The struggle, the gunshots, the structural damage, it had all been too much for timber that was already strained beyond tolerance. The support beam cracked with a sound like a tree falling, and the ceiling began to collapse. Elias grabbed Miguel and pulled him through a narrow gap, just as tons of rock came crashing down. The collapse was total, immediate, deafening. Dust filled the air so thick it was like drowning in earth. When the sounds finally stopped, when the mountain finished its ancient revenge on men who disturbed its sleep, Elias and Miguel found themselves sealed in a small pocket of space near the ventilation shaft entrance. Behind them, where Dutch Keller had been, was now just solid rock. "Is he—" Elias couldn't finish the question. "Probably," Miguel said. He was pressing his hand against his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. "Collapse like that doesn't leave much room for survival. We have to try to dig him out. With what? Our bare hands? That's 10 tons of rock, maybe more. And we've got our own problems." Miguel nodded toward the ventilation shaft. "That's our way out, and I'm not sure I can make the climb with this shoulder." Elias examined the wound by flashlight. The bullet had passed through cleanly, missing bone, but Miguel was losing blood. Without medical attention soon, he'd be in serious trouble. "I'll help you," Elias said. "We do this together or not at all. Getting sentimental in your old age." "Crane, maybe I am." They could hear Marcus and the others on the far side of the collapse, shouting, trying to figure out what had happened. The rockfall was too extensive to clear quickly, but it wouldn't stop them for long. They'd find another route or retreat and cover the main entrance, trapping Elias and Miguel until they could be dealt with. The ventilation shaft was narrow, vertical, cut through solid rock with handholds that had been chiseled a century ago. Some of those holes had broken away. The shaft itself might have collapsed in sections, but it was their only chance. Elias went first, testing each handhold before trusting his weight to it. Miguel followed, using his good arm, teeth gritted against the pain. Progress was measured in feet then inches. Elias's arm screamed with effort. Miguel's breathing became labored, ragged. Halfway up, Miguel slipped. Elias caught him by pure instinct, his own grip nearly failing. For a long moment, they hung there in the darkness, both men suspended over a 70-foot drop, survival balanced on fingertips and will. "I've got you," Elias said. "Just hold on." "Can't." The shoulder. "Yes, you can. You held on when you saved me from Dutch. You held on through 50 years of mining. You can hold on now." Elias's voice was fierce. "I've let too many people fall. I'm not letting you go." Miguel found a new handhold, steadied himself. "You're right. Getting sentimental." They climbed, inch by agonizing inch, handhold by handhold, two old men refusing to give in to gravity and darkness and age. Elias's fingers bled. Miguel's shoulder left a trail of blood on the rock. But they climbed, Above them, Elias saw it. Starlight, the faintest glimmer of night sky, filtering down through the shaft's exit. Hope made physical. Almost there, he gasped. 20 more feet. Those 20 feet took another 15 minutes. When Elias finally pulled himself out onto the mountainside, he lay there for a moment, breathing mountain air that tasted sweeter than anything he'd ever known. Then he reached back down to help Miguel up. They collapsed beside each other on the rocky slope, bleeding and exhausted and alive. "We made it," Miguel said wonderingly. "We did. Now what?" Elias pulled out his phone, hands shaking so badly he could barely work the buttons. One bar of signal flickering. He dialed Tom Hadley's number. The sheriff answered on the first ring. "Elias, where the hell are you?" "We've been waiting. Thornwood's in the mine. He's taking the gold. We've got it on video. Send help. Are you hurt?" "Miguel's shot. I'm okay. We're outside the ventilation shaft, north side of the mountain. I'm already moving. Walter's with me." "Hold tight." Elias ended the call, looked at his friend. "Help's coming." "Good." Miguel's eyes were closed. "Because I don't think I can climb any more tonight." They sat in silence, watching the stars. Down below, lights moved around the mine entrance. Marcus and his men regrouping, realizing their quarry had escaped. A vehicle started, drove away fast. Someone fleeing before law enforcement arrived. "You think Dutch made it?" Miguel asked. "I don't know. I hope so. I don't want another death in that mine. Man pulled a gun on us. I know. But I don't want to be the kind of person who celebrates death, even when it's justified." Elias thought about the 5 miners, about his father, about all the lives the Sentinel had claimed. Too much dying already. Way too much. Tom's patrol car came screaming up the mountain road 15 minutes later, lights flashing. Walter was driving while Tom worked his radio, calling for ambulances and backup. They found Elias and Miguel on the slope, still sitting, still alive. "Miguel needs a hospital," Elias said, as Tom reached them. "Gunshot wound, left shoulder." Tom was already on it, applying pressure, calling for medical evacuation. Walter stood guard, his weapon drawn, watching the mine entrance below. "Did you get it?" Tom asked. "The evidence?" Miguel patted his pack with his good hand. "Every word, every bar of gold he tried to steal. Marcus Thornwood's going to prison, if we can find him," Walter said. "Vehicle took off about 10 minutes ago. Could be anywhere by now." But Elias knew better. He won't run, not yet. He'll go back to his ranch, lawyer up, prepare his defense. Men like Marcus don't run, they fight. And he'll have a story ready, some explanation that makes him the victim. "Let him try," Tom said. "We've got evidence, witnesses, and a crime scene that tells the truth. His great-grandfather might have gotten away with murder, but Marcus won't, not this time." The helicopter arrived as dawn broke over the mountains, its rotors whipping up dust as it settled onto a flat area nearby. Paramedics loaded Miguel onto a stretcher, stabilized his shoulder, prepared him for transport. "You coming?" Miguel asked Elias. "In a minute. Got something I need to do first." The helicopter lifted off, carrying Miguel towards safety and medical care. Tom and Walter secured the mine entrance, preventing anyone from disturbing the evidence inside. And Elias stood on the mountainside, watching the sun paint the peaks gold, feeling something shift inside his chest. He'd gone into that mine seeking treasure and found something more valuable. Courage he'd forgotten he possessed. Friendship that endured even when tested by gunfire and darkness. And a daughter who'd given him a chance at redemption. The mine had almost killed him, just like it had killed his father. But instead, it had given him back his life. The standoff continued through the afternoon. Elias, Sarah, and Tom watched from a command post the state police had established 1/2 mile from the Thornwood ranch. Negotiators kept trying to reach Marcus, but he'd stopped answering calls. Then, just as the sun began its descent toward the peaks, something changed. A vehicle emerged from the ranch house garage. Not Marcus's SUV, but a different car, moving fast toward the main gate. The officers manning the checkpoint moved to intercept, but the car burst through the wooden barrier and accelerated down the road. "That's Jensen," Walter said, watching through binoculars. "The guy we had in custody. His twin brother works for Thornwood." Must have been inside the whole time. The pursuit was brief and anticlimactic. 2 patrol cars blocked the road 3 miles down, and Jensen's brother surrendered without resistance. But while attention was focused on the chase, Marcus Thornwood slipped out a back way. By the time officers breached the ranch house, it was empty except for security staff who claimed they'd been locked in the basement. Marcus was gone, and so was a significant amount of cash and several vehicles. He planned this, Tom said, studying the empty safe in Marcus's study. The brother was a distraction. While we were all watching the front gate, Marcus went out the back. How much of a head start does he have? Sarah asked. He planned this, Tom said, studying the empty safe in Marcus's study. The brother was a distraction. While we were all watching the front gate, Marcus went out the back. How much of a head start does he have? Sarah asked. Maybe 30 minutes. Could be in 3 different states by now, or holed up somewhere local. We've got alerts out, roadblocks on the highways, but he's not running, Elias interrupted. Not yet, Tom turned to him. What makes you say that? Because men like Marcus don't leave unfinished business. He's lost everything, his reputation, his freedom, probably his fortune once the lawyers are done. But there's one thing he still wants. Elias met Tom's eyes. Revenge. And there's only one place he can get what he thinks is his and hurt me at the same time. The mine, Sarah said, understanding immediately. The gold that's left. State police are guarding it, Tom said. But his hand was already moving toward his radio. The call came through before he could key the mic. An officer's voice, urgent and frightened. Shots fired at the Sentinel mine. Officer down. Suspect is armed, and the transmission cut off into static. Tom was moving before the radio went dead, running for his patrol car. Elias and Sarah followed, piling into the back seat. Walter jumped into the driver's seat and they took off, lights flashing, siren wailing. You 2 stay in the car when we get there, Tom ordered, checking his weapon. This is police business now. The hell it is, Elias said. This is about me, about that mine. I'm not hiding while people get shot protecting my property. Dad, Sarah started. No, I've spent too long letting other people face consequences meant for me. My father died in a mine while I watched. Miguel took a bullet because I got him involved. I'm not standing aside anymore. Tom looked at him through the rearview mirror, started to argue, then nodded curtly. Stay behind me. Do exactly what I say. And if bullets start flying, you hit the ground and stay there. They reached the mine in 8 minutes that felt like hours. 2 state police vehicles were parked near the entrance, doors open. One officer lay on the ground, his partner kneeling beside him, applying pressure to a leg wound. Another officer was pinned behind his vehicle, exchanging occasional shots with someone inside the mine. Thornwood went in about 5 minutes ago, the officer called out as Tom approached. He's armed with a rifle, says he'll kill anyone who follows him. Martinez took one in the leg, trying to stop him. Tom assessed the situation quickly. How bad is Martinez? Through and through, missed the artery. He'll make it, but he needs an ambulance. Already called. ETA 10 minutes. Tom looked at the mine entrance, that dark mouth in the mountainside that had swallowed so many lives. Thornwood say anything about his intentions? Just that what's in that mine belongs to him, and he's taking it or dying in the attempt. Sarah grabbed Elias's arm. You can't go in there. He'll kill you. Maybe, but I know that mine better than anyone alive. If Marcus is going for the vault, I can guess his route. Maybe head him off before he reaches the 3rd level. Elias looked at Tom. You need someone who can navigate those tunnels in the dark. That's me. And me, a voice said behind them. They turned to find Miguel Santos climbing out of a vehicle that had just arrived. His left arm in a sling, his face pale but determined. You're supposed to be in a hospital, Elias said. Check myself out. Heard the radio chatter. Figured you'd do something stupid, and I couldn't let you have all the fun. Miguel nodded toward the mine. Besides, he shot me. That makes this personal. Tom opened his mouth to refuse, looked at both old miners' faces and closed it again. Fine, but you follow my lead. I'm the one with the badge and the training, and we're the ones who know where we're going, Miguel said. Your training won't matter if you get lost in the dark and fall down a shaft. They geared up quickly. Flashlights, rope. The pistol Tom provided to Elias with reluctance. Sarah wanted to come, but even she had to admit that 3 people was already pushing the danger level to unacceptable. "Please be careful," she said, hugging her father tight. "I just got you back. I'm not ready to lose you again." "You won't," Elias promised, hoping it wasn't a lie. They entered the Sentinel mine for what Elias hoped would be the last time. The darkness swallowed them like it had swallowed so many others. But this time Elias wasn't afraid. He'd faced death in these tunnels and survived. He'd found courage he thought he'd lost, and he had something to come back to now. A daughter who loved him, despite everything. They moved quickly but carefully, Elias and Miguel in the lead, Tom covering their rear. They could hear movement ahead, the sound of someone moving fast and reckless through the tunnels. Marcus knew they'd follow. He was probably counting on it. At the second level, they found evidence of his passage, fresh boot prints in the dust, a dropped flashlight still burning. He was heading for the 3rd level, for the vault, exactly as Elias had predicted. "We can cut him off," Miguel said quietly. "There's a maintenance tunnel that parallels the main shaft. We can get ahead of him, be waiting when he reaches the counting chamber." Tom nodded, and they altered their route. The maintenance tunnel was narrow and treacherous, forcing them to move single file through spaces that barely accommodated a man's shoulders. But it saved time, and time was everything. They emerged into the counting chamber just as Marcus Thornwood entered from the opposite tunnel. He held a rifle at the ready, his face dirty and wild in the beam of their flashlights. When he saw them waiting, something like respect flickered across his features before hardening back into rage. "Should have known you'd find a way to get ahead of me," he said. "Old prospector tricks." "It's over, Marcus," Tom said, his weapon aimed steady at Thornwood's center mass. "There's no way out except through us, and I will shoot if you don't put down that rifle." "Then shoot." "Because I'm not leaving empty-handed." Marcus gestured toward the vault with his rifle barrel. "My great-grandfather died searching for this. My grandfather and father spent their lives trying to recover what should have been ours. I'm not walking away now." "It was never yours," Elias said. "That gold was stolen by Confederate raiders, taken from Union paymasters, meant for a war that's been over for 160 years. Your great-grandfather murdered 5 men to keep it secret. You shot Miguel and tried to kill both of us for the same reason. How much more blood before you admit the truth?" "The truth?" Marcus laughed, a sound without humor. "The truth is that the weak make up rules to protect themselves from the strong. My family built this county. We created jobs, kept people fed, made Silver Point matter, and all we asked in return was respect and what was rightfully ours." "You asked for a lot more than that," Tom said. "You asked people to look away from murder, to accept corruption as normal, to let you take whatever you wanted because your name was Thornwood." And they did. For generations they did. Until this old fool— Marcus swung the rifle toward Elias, stuck his nose where it didn't belong. The rifle shot was deafening in the enclosed space. But Marcus never got the chance to pull the trigger. Tom fired first, a single shot that caught Marcus in the shoulder, spinning him around. The rifle clattered to the stone floor. Marcus went down, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. But he was laughing, a broken sound that echoed off the walls. "You still don't understand," he said. "None of you do. That gold is cursed. Everyone who's touched it has paid a price. The Confederates who stole it, dead in this mine. The miners in 1938 murdered for finding it. Sheriff Hadley died knowing he'd become a thief himself. And now you—" He looked at Elias with eyes that held something like pity. "You think you've won, but you've only invited the curse into your life. Watch how fast it takes everything from you." "There's no curse," Elias said quietly. "Just men making bad choices and blaming fate for the consequences. Your great-grandfather chose murder. Your father and grandfather chose to cover it up. You chose to continue the cycle. The only curse is the one you brought on yourselves." Tom was already calling for backup, for medical assistance. Walter appeared with 2 other officers, taking custody of Marcus, securing the scene. The standoff was over. As they led Marcus Thornwood away, still laughing his broken laugh, Elias stood in the counting chamber and felt the weight of history pressing down. This mine had seen so much: greed, murder, desperate hopes, and shattered dreams. It had taken his father, nearly taken him and Miguel, claimed Dutch Keller in a cave-in that might have been justice or just bad luck. "You okay?" Miguel asked, standing beside him. "Yeah, just thinking about all the men who died here. What they were looking for, what they found instead. And what about you? What did you find?" Elias thought about that. About the journey that had started with $200 and a foreclosed mine, that had led through darkness and gunfire to this moment. What had he found? "Purpose," he said finally. "And maybe something like peace." They walked out of the Sentinel mine together, leaving the vault and its gold to the state police, to historians and lawyers and whatever official processes would determine its final disposition. Elias didn't care anymore. The treasure had never been the point. Sarah was waiting at the entrance, and when she saw him emerge into daylight, alive and whole, she ran to him. He caught her in his arms, held her tight, and knew that this was the real treasure he'd found in the darkness. Everything else was just gold. 3 months had passed since the night Marcus Thornwood was carried out of the Sentinel mine in handcuffs, and Silver Point had slowly returned to something resembling normal. Though normal, Elias reflected, was a relative term when your town had just become the center of a national news story about Confederate gold, century-old murders, and corruption spanning 4 generations. The legal proceedings had concluded with Marcus pleading guilty to theft, assault with a deadly weapon, and conspiracy. His lawyers had negotiated a 20-year sentence in exchange for testimony about his family's crimes and the location of the gold bars he'd already sold. The Thornwood Ranch had been seized, its assets frozen, and what remained of the family fortune would likely be tied up in lawsuits for years. Dutch Keller had survived the cave-in, rescued after 18 hours, buried under rock. He'd lost his left leg below the knee, but gained a measure of redemption by testifying against Marcus in exchange for a reduced sentence. He'd served 5 years for assault and received probation for the rest. Some in town thought it was too lenient. Elias thought maybe survival and disfigurement was punishment enough. The Confederate gold, after extensive documentation and authentication, had been declared property of the federal government. The finder's fee paid to Elias was modest, $50,000, enough to be comfortable, but not enough to change who he was. He donated half to the Silver Point Historical Society, where it would fund a museum dedicated to telling the complete story of the Sentinel mine and the 5 men who died there in 1938. The bodies of Robert Garrett and his 4 friends had been recovered, identified through dental records and personal effects, and given proper burial in the Silver Point Cemetery. Their families, scattered across 3 states, had come for the ceremony. Elias had stood among them, feeling the weight of history finally being honored, debts finally being paid. Now, on a crisp December morning, Elias stood in the office of the Silver Point Community Center, looking at architectural plans spread across the table. Sarah stood beside him, pointing out details in the drawings. "The main hall here can seat 200 for community events," she explained. "The classroom wings will provide space for adult education, job training, arts programs. And the medical clinic in this section will finally give the town access to basic health care, without driving 2 hours to the nearest hospital." Tom Hadley, who'd been promoted to county sheriff after the Thornwood scandal revealed corruption in the higher ranks, nodded approvingly. William Hadley's dream finally realized. Using that gold to save the town just like he'd intended, the federal government, in consultation with state officials and local representatives, had decided that a portion of the gold's value should be returned to Silver Point as compensation for decades of corruption and harm caused by the Thornwood family's crimes. The community center was just the first project. There would be infrastructure improvements, school renovations, economic development initiatives. "Your father would be proud," Elias told Tom. "He started this, using that gold to save the town during the Depression. We're just finishing what he began. He'd be even more proud of you," Tom said. You could have kept quiet, taken Marcus's money, walked away. But you chose the hard right over the easy wrong. That takes courage." Elias shook his head. "Wasn't courage. Was just being too stubborn to quit and too old to start running again. That's what courage looks like at our age," Miguel said from the doorway. He walked with a slight limp now, and his left arm's mobility was permanently reduced, but he was alive and ornery as ever.
Showing up, doing what needs doing, surviving to complain about it afterward. They reviewed the plans for another hour, making notes, suggesting changes.
The community center would break ground in spring, with completion expected in 18 months. It felt right, Elias thought. Something good rising from all that darkness and death. Something that would serve the living instead of just commemorating the dead. After the meeting, Sarah walked with Elias back to his new home. He'd sold the isolated cabin and bought a small house on the edge of town proper, close enough to hear neighbors, far enough to still see the mountains. Sarah visited every other weekend, driving up from Denver, and they were slowly rebuilding what had been broken between them. "I've been thinking about Mom," Sarah said as they walked. "About what she said before she died, about you deserving a chance at redemption. I think about her too. Wish I'd been better to her. She knew you loved her. She just wished you'd loved yourself enough to be present." Sarah took his arm, but she also said something else. She said the mine wasn't your enemy. It was your refuge, that you disappeared underground because the world above was too painful after Dad died. Your grandfather. "You mean?" "Right, sorry. Still getting used to calling you Dad again." Sarah smiled slightly. "Anyway, she was right, wasn't she? The mine was where you felt safe, where you felt competent and useful. It wasn't the mine that was the problem. It was that you couldn't figure out how to feel that way anywhere else." Elias considered that. "Maybe, but I'm trying to now. Therapy helps. I'm proud of you for going. I know it's not easy for your generation to talk about feelings. My generation talks about feelings just fine. We just do it through stories about fishing and complaints about the weather." But he was smiling as he said it. They reached his house, and Sarah came in for coffee. The interior was still sparse. Elias had never been much for decoration, but there were new additions. Photographs on the walls, Sarah at various ages, including the one of her as a child drawn with crayons. His ex-wife on their wedding day. His father standing in front of a mine, young and strong and alive. Miguel with a massive fish, grinning like a fool. And on his desk in a place of honor was a new pocket watch. It looked similar to his father's, but was modern, functional, ticking steadily forward instead of being frozen in the past. Sarah had given it to him after the dust settled, after Marcus's trial, after everything was finally over. The inscription on the back read, "For the time we have left. Love, Sarah." "I've been thinking about next steps," Sarah said, sitting at the kitchen table. "About what you want to do now that the mine situation is resolved. Tom offered me a job, consulting with the sheriff's department on mining safety, abandoned properties, that sort of thing. Pays modestly but keeps me busy. And I think I'll take it. Stay involved, stay useful. Maybe teach some classes on prospecting and geology at the community college when the new center opens." Elias poured coffee, handed her a mug. "But I've also been thinking about travel. Maybe visiting some places I never got to see because I was always underground. You mentioned wanting to do a trip to Europe next summer." Sarah's face lit up. "You'd actually come? I thought you were just being polite when I mentioned it. I'm old, not dead. And I figure I owe you about 30 years of family trips. Might as well start making up for lost time." They talked for another hour about plans and possibilities, about the future instead of dwelling on the past. It felt strange and wonderful in equal measure, this thing they were building together. Not a restoration of what had been, that was impossible, but something new. Something that acknowledged the scars while choosing to move forward anyway. Miguel stopped by in the afternoon, bringing sourdough bread from his latest baking experiment. He'd taken up cooking during his recovery, claiming he needed a hobby that didn't involve potentially deadly cave-ins. "Thought you two might be hungry," he said, setting the loaf on the counter. Fair warning, I'm still figuring out the yeast ratios. They ate the bread, which was actually quite good, and talked about the upcoming winter, about Miguel's plans to visit his daughter in California, about Walter Price's engagement to the librarian's granddaughter. Town's changing, Miguel observed. Feels younger somehow. More hopeful. The gold helping? Elias asked. The gold's part of it, but I think it's more about the story. About how ordinary people stood up to corruption and won. Makes folks believe things can get better, that they have agency in their own lives. Miguel smiled. That's a more valuable treasure than any amount of gold. As evening approached, Sarah prepared to drive back to Denver. She had school Monday morning, papers to grade, lesson plans to finalize. She hugged her father at the door, held on a little longer than necessary. Thank you, she said. For what? For reaching out. For taking that risk. For giving us this chance. She pulled back, looked at him seriously. I know it wasn't easy, admitting you needed help, asking me to come. But I'm glad you did. I'm glad we're doing this. Me too, Elias said, his voice rough. More than I can say. After she left, Elias sat on his porch as the sun set over the mountains. The Sentinel mine was visible from here, a dark scar on the mountainside. The entrance had been permanently sealed, declared a memorial site. A bronze plaque had been installed, listing the names of all who died there. Jacob Crane, the 5 miners from 1938, and yes, even Jonathan Thornwood's victims, whose names had been lost to time, but whose deaths were finally acknowledged. The mine had taken so much, but in a strange way it had also given back. It had forced Elias to confront himself, to find courage he'd forgotten he possessed, to reach out instead of pulling away. It had reunited him with his daughter, forged bonds with Miguel and Tom that felt like family. Some treasures, he'd learned, weren't found in the darkness. They were found in the light you carried into the darkness, and in the people who helped you carry it. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Love you, Dad. See you in 2 weeks. Maybe bring Miguel. He promised to teach me his sourdough recipe. Elias smiled, typed back, love you too. Miguel says his recipe is a family secret, but I think he can be bribed with compliments. The mountains stood eternal against the darkening sky, keeping their secrets, patient and ancient. The Sentinel mine was closed now, its story told, its dead honored, its treasure dispersed to serve the living. No more men would die chasing ghosts in its depths, but the mountains would remain, and new stories would be written. Some would be tragedies, some triumphs. Most would be something in between, ordinary people making their way through extraordinary circumstances, finding what they could of meaning and connection in the brief time they were given. Elias touched the pocket watch in his shirt, felt it ticking steadily forward. Not frozen at 3:47 anymore. Not stopped in the past, weighed down by guilt and regret. Moving forward, marking time that was lived rather than endured. He stood, stretched his back, and went inside. Tomorrow, he'd start his new consulting job with the sheriff's department. Next week, he'd teach his first community college class. In 2 weeks, Sarah would visit again, and they'd continue the slow, patient work of rebuilding trust and love. The mine had almost killed him, just like it had killed his father. But in the end, it had given him back his life. Not the old life. That was gone forever, buried under 30 years of mistakes and missed chances. But a new life, built on hard-won wisdom and second chances, and the understanding that it's never too late to choose courage over comfort, connection over isolation, truth over convenient lies. Sometimes what we find in the darkness isn't what we were looking for. It's what we needed all along. Elias had gone into the Sentinel mine seeking silver and found gold. But more than that, he'd found himself, or rather, he'd found the person he'd been meant to become before fear and grief had sent him underground. And that, he thought as he settled into his chair with a book and a cup of tea, that was the real treasure. Not Confederate gold or historical artifacts or national headlines. Just the simple, profound gift of being present in his own life, of showing up for the people who mattered, of having something worth living for besides just avoiding death. The mountains watched over Silver Point as they had for millennia, as they would for millennia more. And in a small house at the edge of town, an old miner who'd finally learned to live above ground smiled and turned the page, ready for whatever came next.